But we are very excited to welcome folks to Climate Preparedness Week. So this is our inaugural event, which we're delighted to have Eric Klinenberg on with us for. As folks hopefully are aware, Climate Preparedness Week, this is the third week, the first time we're doing it all virtually in light of the pandemic. But this is a partnership of communities responding to extreme weather, or CREW, and the Mass Library System, as well as the Blue Marble Librarians. We do want to thank the many partners, in addition to the Mass Library System and the Blue Marble Librarians, who have helped make this week possible. These are many organizations who have helped advertise the events of this week, as well as many of them have also hosted their own events over the course of this week. So thank you to all of our many partners. Thankfully, too many to name all of them, but we're very grateful to have your partnership on this week. And finally, just want to share a couple of words about CREW, which is the organization that I'm representing. And for those who don't know me, my name is Craig Altemose. I'm the Executive Director of Better Future Project, which is the parent organization of CREW. And CREW is a young grassroots program that works to build equitable, inclusive neighborhood climate resilience in New England, and actually soon will be expanding beyond New England through hands-on education, service, and planning. And three particular opportunities that folks have to engage. One is obviously through Climate Preparedness Week, which you're doing, and we'll have more events coming up this week. We also are partnering with the Mass Library System and others, including actually the American Library Association, around this concept of climate resilience hubs, which we may get into later this evening. But if you're part of an anchor community institution, a house of worship, a library, a civic center that might like to learn about how they can become a climate resilience hub and better engage their community around climate resilience, we have a link appearing in the chat momentarily, and we encourage you to check that out and to reach out to us to discuss that. And similarly, we also have CREW teams of individuals, volunteers who are working to enhance the resilience of their communities. And if that's something you're interested in, would love to hear from you on that. But we are all here to really hear from and welcome Eric Klinenberg, who is the Helen Gould Shepard Professor of Social Science and the Director of Institute for Public Knowledge at New York University, and the author of a number of prominent, well-received books and New York Times bestsellers, two of which have had a really deep and profound impact on CREW's work: Heat Wave, A Social Autopsy of Disaster in Chicago, and the more recent Palaces for the People, How Social Infrastructure Can Help Fight Inequality, Polarization, and the Decline of Civic Life. His scholarly work has been published in journals including the American Sociological Review, Theory and Society, and Ethnography, and he has contributed to The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, Rolling Stone, and This American Life. Actually, just very recently had a New York Times op-ed published, which we also may touch on tonight. So we are so delighted to have Eric with us this evening, and without further ado, I will turn it over to Eric.
Hey, and thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for being here. Wherever here is, who knows. I'm only sad that we can't be together in person, because these are the kind of days when you just want what sociologists call a little bit of collective effervescence at the end of the night, like the experience of being physically together to share sorrows and to build some kind of sense that we can do something better and differently together. And I still think that we can, but between RBG last week and the decision out of Louisville today, and the ongoing threat to democracy and the crisis and 200,000 deaths, from COVID and our bungled response to it. I mean, these are dark times, and I miss the physical companionship of other people who I would ordinarily rely on to get me through it. And I just want to acknowledge that. I mean, this is a nice substitute. And I thank the tech, gurus of Silicon Valley for giving us an option to do something better than smoke signals. But it's not that much better, to be honest. I mean, we really need each other. And I hope a lot of people who are planning on being here tonight are not here because they're out in the streets, calling for a different world, because we need it. And I guess that's where I want to start our conversation tonight. I mean, it is a dark and scary time, no doubt. But also, I have to say, this is the first time in the history of my life where it feels like everything is up in the air, that everything is up for grabs, that almost anything is possible. That, you know, if you told me that a few months from now we would be looking down the barrel of a constitutional crisis and the specter of the kind of end of the American democratic experiment would be right before us, I would completely understand that, and that would make sense to me, and it wouldn't surprise me. But also, if you told me that a few months from now we would be looking at a possibility for a Green New Deal and a transformed Supreme Court and revitalized American social institutions and a renewed sense of kind of solidarity and mission and purpose, in a way, I find that even more plausible. Everything hangs in the balance of what happens here in this country, in our communities in the next few weeks. And I find that both completely terrifying and kind of exhilarating. And I want to just acknowledge that and seize that and call attention to what that means for us at this moment. You know, when the pandemic first started, I'm sure a lot of you heard this message that came from the World Health Organization and from your local government, surely as well, which is that the way we needed to survive this crisis was by becoming socially distant, right? We all got this message. Social distancing is the solution to preserving your health and maintaining the health of everyone else. And so social distancing was this kind of big idea. And when I heard that, I got really nervous because I understood the notion that distance would protect people during a pandemic. But I also knew that it was really physical distance that kept people safe. Physically not coughing and sneezing and breathing on each other is what keeps us alive during a pandemic. And in a way, social distance was the opposite of what we needed. What we needed more than anything else is social support, but social solidarity, social cohesion. That's what makes us able to withstand challenges around us. And I knew that personally from work that I had done years before. The first book I wrote, and Craig alluded to it just now, is a book about a heat wave disaster in Chicago in 1995. I grew up in Chicago, and I got really kind of immersed in this study of what happened in 95. More than 700 people died from a heat wave that lasted just a couple of days. And what I learned when I worked on that disaster is that it was exactly social distancing that made people vulnerable. It was isolation of a profound kind that kept people, in their homes, baking to death, instead of in the companionship of their neighbors and friends and family, or in the service of social service agencies and government agencies that are there to protect us. People in Chicago in 95, especially people in the most abandoned and impoverished and depleted communities, were left on their own, and they just couldn't take it. And when I did research on that project, what I came to appreciate is just how important it is for us to think about our social networks, our social relationships, and not just the traditional set of things that come up in conversations about climate change, but how our social lives shape our experiences of extreme events. And I came up with an idea when I was working on that book, based on observations I had made in some neighborhoods in Chicago. I had looked really carefully at which neighborhoods wound up suffering the most during that heat disaster, and which neighborhoods wound up being most resilient. And what I discovered is that there are actually some interesting surprises. If you looked across neighborhoods, looking at places that were very poor and vulnerable and segregated, and places that had every reason to have a high death rate during that heat disaster, it turned out that, well, sure enough, a bunch of places actually were the most dangerous places you could be in Chicago, to no one's surprise. But there are a bunch of places that fit the profile of the most vulnerable areas in Chicago, places that should have statistically been catastrophically deadly, that in fact proved to be remarkably resilient. And when I did my book, I looked really carefully at what features of those neighborhoods help people there survive. And what I discovered is that there's this thing that I've come to call social infrastructure, that refers to the physical places and the organizations that shape our capacity to interact and engage with each other. And I realized that when, we build social infrastructure, when we design it well, when we maintain it, we're actually much better able to engage each other and support each other and work with each other on urgent projects, whether they're projects for social justice or projects for climate justice or just the project of keeping our neighbors alive, than they are if we don't have a social infrastructure that's welcoming and hospitable and maintained well. And the difference between the neighborhoods in Chicago that were able to survive that heat wave and the neighborhoods that were just like them demographically, but that had really high death rates, was really nothing other than the social infrastructure. Social infrastructure made the difference between life and death. And, after I wrote that book about Chicago, I moved to New York. I've been teaching it at New York University for many years now. And when Sandy hit New York City in 2012, I wound up being invited by the Obama administration to serve as the research director for a large multi-billion-dollar federal competition called Rebuild by Design, whose purpose was to help communities design and build infrastructure for the 21st century. Infrastructure that would help them get through things like pandemics and a hotter climate with higher seas. And when I agreed to do that, it was an exciting opportunity because I got to work with these teams of architects and engineers and landscape architects and city planners and push them to think about what kind of cities, what kind of regions, what kind of communities they could potentially build with a project. And it was an amazing experience. And there's one experience that was really remarkable to me, which is that I was working with this team of designers that had done amazing work to help communities in the South recover from Hurricane Katrina. And they were trying to come up with a project for this competition that would be kind of big and inspiring and exciting enough to win an award and to potentially get built. And they were struggling because it was, it's a challenge. It's heady. There's a big competition. There are 150 design teams, some of the world's most renowned designers in them. And they wanted to do something exciting. And they came to me one day and they said, Eric, we've been really having a hard time, but we've come upon an idea that we think is going to work. We want to design something that we're calling a resilience center. And I said, wow, that sounds like a great idea. I mean, I'm buying it, or tell me about the resilience center. And they said, well, we think that every community needs a place where people feel at home and welcome. They need a place that's going to be accessible to them, a place that's going to be open all the time, like a kind of home away from home. And they'll use it during ordinary times, but they'll also have it at their disposal if there's a crisis and they need a place to go and get support. And said, wow, that sounds like an amazing thing. And they said, so imagine if we had like a public institution that was in every neighborhood of every city, maybe in every suburb, in every small town. And it was open 5, 6, 7 days a week. It was staffed by these resilience professionals whose job was to be almost aggressively welcoming to members of the community who came in. They welcomed everyone, but they knew that very young people and very old people are the most rooted in the places where they live, and so the most likely to come and use the Resilience Center. And so they would do a lot of special programming for those age groups. And they said, we know that like young people don't come to to the Resilience Center by themselves. They have parents and caretakers who bring them there. And so if we're going to have songs and story hours and play groups for the young kids, we need to have tablets and machines and periodicals and comfortable places to sit for the parents and caretakers who are there with them. And for the older people, we'd have current events classes, and we could have cultural events and maybe book groups and things like that. And we just really think that this is an exciting idea. And the notion is like, if every community has a place like that, then when there's a crisis, everyone will know where to go. And we'll build brand new buildings and we'll take care of them, and they'll have, backup electricity, they'll have generators, they'll have flexible kitchens, we can make them multi-purpose designs. And I said, well, that's an amazing idea. I love the notion of a resilience center in every community. And then I also said to them, have you ever heard of a library? Because, although I liked what they were trying to do and very much appreciated the vision of a resilience center for a place where people could go in a time of need, I also understood that in the United States, one of the amazing things we have that not every society on earth has is this set of libraries, public libraries, branch libraries. They're in our neighborhoods in every city. They're in almost every suburb and every small town. They're an amazing gift that we have been given by generations before us that got some funding from government or got some philanthropic support from an organization, or the Andrew Carnegie, who came up with this idea of palaces for the people, and built and ran these resources. And it occurred to me that, possibly instead of thinking about building, brand new structures with brand new titles and brand new places, if we really want to strengthen our communities and build up our social infrastructure and create more resilient places for the threats that are coming to us, whether it's threats of climate change or threats of the future COVIDs of the world, maybe we should take a closer look at some of the resources that we already have and take better care of them. Provide them with some funding, rebuild the infrastructure, make sure they have accessibility for everyone, make sure they have generators. So in case the power goes out in the neighborhood, you can go to the library and call it a resilience center and use it that way. Make sure the bathrooms have been updated or expanded. Make sure that there's comfortable seating for everyone. Make sure that there are places for all different people who want to use them. Make sure that there's a staff that's adequate enough to handle all the demands that are on libraries as resilient centers in the daily life of communities. Libraries, as you surely know, are dealing not just with people who want to read books, but also with all kinds of people who come to the library because it's one of the only places where they are welcome and where they are dignified. And where they are encouraged to come and aspire to be something better, even if it just means being a little bit better that day. We are so fortunate to have this set of resources in our communities. And my observation from having spent the better part of the last few years looking closely at how American cities and states treat their social infrastructure is that we're neglecting them. We're taking them for granted. We treat them as afterthoughts. We treat them as luxury goods. We fund these places when we can, but often that means we can't. And I'm especially worried about what happens to places like libraries as we move into a new moment with a fiscal crisis and states and cities that just feel like they need to cut their budgets wherever they can and might not be fully cognizant of all the ways in which places like libraries make a difference. And so I'm not going to say that much more tonight because I'm looking forward to the conversation with Clayton and with Craig and everyone else who's here. But I do want to say that when it comes to our challenge for dealing with climate change and creating, more resilient places, we need to think about not just hard infrastructure, not just the power grid and the communications network and the tunnels and the bridges and the flood management systems. We also need to think about our social infrastructure and to what extent we live in a place that's set up to help us succeed on our own and with each other, that's set up to help us support one another, that's set up to help us take care of the vulnerable, whomever they are. And so I think we're fortunate to have a library, but also pretty sure that the libraries that most of us have are not doing everything that they could be doing if we gave them the resources we need. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back over to Craig and Clayton. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. Brilliant remarks, and so delighted to have you with us today. I do want to turn over to my colleague and friend now, Clayton Cheever, who is the Assistant Director at the Thomas Crane Public Library in Quincy, Massachusetts. As Eric said, libraries play such a critical role in our society, and they're such a key part of the fabric of our community, and I feel like it was necessary and appropriate to have a librarian as a key part of the discussion, and Clayton's been doing some really strong work within the library system for quite a while. We're delighted to have him here with us. Clayton?
Thank you, Craig, and thank you, Eric. It's really, I'm certainly basking in the praise, and there's something that drew me to public library work when I started down this path several years ago, and there's definitely something that keeps me engaged, even though, in these crazy times, it's the nature of the work has radically changed since when I first went to library school, and that's true for a lot of people who've been in libraries for a long time. I really liked, I enjoyed your book, Eric, and I thank you for bringing these kind of issues to the forefront and helping us think about the important role that libraries and other cultural institutions play. As you were talking just now, it definitely resonated with me, the idea of resilient centers and libraries as those places. And I was glad I was writing down what you were talking about as the necessary kind of components. And, there was a lot of infrastructure there, a lot of, brick and mortar and seating and accessibility, but then you got to staff. And I really appreciated that, because that is certainly, people love to build, Carnegie built beautiful buildings, but it's the people that really make the difference. I have the honor to work in a gorgeous old building. It's not a Carnegie building. It's a sort of Richardson, Henry Hudson Richardson built some beautiful palaces for people all across the country, and we have one of those in Quincy, which is great. But for all the beautiful architecture in the world, it's the people that make the difference, and it's our ability to, as librarians and as library staff, to connect people with the resources in our community that really is what's going to, that's the threads that make this resiliency happen. And so one of the things I had to actually translate, because as I was thinking about your book, Eric, and the idea of social infrastructure, which you talked about a bunch tonight, I had to translate, and you got to this towards the end of the book, where you started using the term inclusive infrastructure, because I think all infrastructure actually has a social nature, whether it was the people who were trying to drive, a highway through the community of Jamaica Plain here in Boston, where I live, that was fought back by people who said, no, that's going to serve the social needs of the commuters who want to get in and out of the hub, but it was ignoring the social needs of the people inside. And the term that you brought up towards the end of the book that I really liked, and I'd like us to think about some more tonight, is inclusive infrastructure, or publicly inclusive infrastructure, because all infrastructure is serving a purpose. So I kind of wanted to draw that, and maybe we could talk a little bit more about how we make sure that things are inclusive, because I think historically we've had a society which is so obvious when you take a step back and look at it, and when you think about all the members of our community, where there have been members of our community that have been historically excluded from these places. And so I think it's that whole idea of inclusiveness that's why I love working in a building that says free to all over the door. What I think you were trying to get at, what I think is really the important distinction when we talk about social infrastructure and physical infrastructure, is that idea of engineering. And while we do social engineering, it's the idea that I don't think, and I think we would all agree on this, that there's some problems like we're in right now where there's not just an engineering solution. There's going to be an engineering component, but what's really most important is these social connections and doing those in an inclusive way, so that we can get out of this mess that we're in, whether it's a mess with climate change, whether it's a mess with historic racism. There are so many issues, and we have to figure out how we're going to do it collectively. So what I think we really need to think about is community building, and those models for community building that are inclusive. And it's not just the engineering, but it's the social engineering, and some of that's done through space for sure, and some of that is facilitated by libraries. But I wonder if you have some ideas about how to get historically neglected or unlistened to voices. How do we make sure that people are listening to them today? Because that's a struggle we have as libraries, where we see a lot of people from communities have not been parts of our community that have not been listened to. They've come to us for refuge for years. How do we amplify those voices?
So those are a lot of questions and good questions, and boy, I wish I really had the answer to the last one. How do we listen to and respect and then deliver what's needed when we hear voices from people who we've long neglected? I guess one could say tonight of all nights that might be the one of the great challenges for our country. There are a lot of voices that we have not taken seriously or recognized and heard as legitimate. And, what they're telling us on a number of fronts is that we've created a society so fundamentally unjust, unequal, that it might not last. And so I think we face a moment where there's a real crisis of legitimacy. I think that the country is due for a reckoning, and I think different communities are doing better or worse job at addressing that. I think the challenges are formidable, but I think that this is a moment where people who were unable to hear before are beginning to listen. And obviously not everyone is. Some people are doubling down, more guns, more Confederate flags, more exclusion, more discrimination. That's clearly happening. But I feel like we're in the midst of a process here in which we're going to have to open up. And so back to your first point on openness and accessibility, I think you're right. I think what distinguishes libraries from other from other social infrastructure and from many other institutions is their radical commitment to inclusiveness. And the fact that they are inclusive not only in principle, but also in programs. Libraries aren't just places. They're places that are staffed with these, magical people called librarians, whose job is to dignify the people who come in, to ask the patrons of the system, how can I help you? And to do that all without expecting a bonus, a tip, a fee. That's kind of an extraordinary thing. If the library did not exist already, and we pitched the idea of building libraries, we would be, called out as preposterous and utopian, because it's so out of sync with the priorities of our society today. But in my book, and when I speak, I emphasize the role of public infrastructures, public social infrastructures like libraries, because they really do model something that's special. And a lot of our other gathering places, the pub, the diner, the coffee shop, they ask a hefty price for admission. And, just down the block from the library where I spent so much time in the Lower East Side of New York when I was working on Policies for the People, there was a Dunkin' Donuts and a McDonald's. And both of them had very prominent signs around the restaurant saying, no loitering, you're allowed to stay for 30 minutes, only paying customers can be here. And I guarantee you, Clayton, that if I went in there, white guy with a laptop, I could sit all day before someone would ask me to move. But, if you have dark skin, if you don't have a place to call your home, they're going to ask you to leave pretty quickly. And so I just think it's so important for us to start asking the question of how do we rebuild? What kinds of places and institutions do we need if we're going to get out of this horrible crisis that we're in? And I'm not glib about it. I mean, I don't think we're going to build a bunch of libraries and solve the problem of polarization that we have in this country. But if I was trying to solve the problem of polarization and inequality, I don't know many better places to begin than the kinds of social infrastructures that I describe in the book.
Well, thank you. As I've been talking to folks about these subjects recently, something that's come up, and it's come up when we're talking about a lot of different issues. It's, when we're talking about climate change, when I'm talking to people, we had a statewide symposium to look at the opioid epidemic, because I'm sure it's no surprise to you that there are people using opioids in libraries, using libraries as distribution centers for opioids. And so it's something we've, especially in busier places, when you see a lot of people, you see all walks of life, and you see some pretty dark sides. And so there's a concern when I talk to folks about all these issues of geez, this is overwhelming. There is just so much to take on. We, signed up for library school so that we could engage with, intellectual ideas and share those and be the people's university. But geez, now I need to be able to like administer Narcan. I need to be able to respond to like somebody who's passed out on our floor. I need to, and now we need to figure out how we're going to help everybody respond to these massive like worldwide crises that have been generations in the making. I can't take this. And so there's this concern about mission creep when we often talk to other librarians about what are librarians really good at. And I would make a counter argument that we are really good at connecting people with resources, and it is in line with what you're saying. But I think we have to do it, and we have to go back to our core values and our core mission as libraries. And when I think about my library in Quincy, we've gone through a whole strategic planning process and broken it down to looking at what other resources are available in the community and what role do we play and are uniquely poised to play, and have defined that, and I can summarize it into we're interested in helping people satisfy their curiosity. The kid who wants to learn about something that they're not learning about from anywhere else, the teen who's exploring sexual orientation needs a safe place to do that. The adult who wants to figure out what's up with the story that they've been hearing from their friends. Is it true, or are there other ways to look at these issues? So that's a really important role. We want to spark imagination. We delight in stories and in creative expression, and we can really be that place to do that. And that can take us in so many ways, because I think when we're looking at imagination, that's how we're going to find the strength to continue in the face of all these incredible odds. And we're about addressing the digital divide and connecting people to the online world, which is so essential in this modern age. And the fourth priority for my library is all about fostering community. And I don't think these are unique to our library. I think these are similar to priorities for a lot of libraries around the country. But when we define them in those ways, then we can find the people who, all right, what are the people in our community curious about? Are people, curious about climate change? We in Quincy have the Quincy Climate Action Network, who is very interested, engaged in fighting climate change and raising awareness about that. But they're also interested in having conversations about what's meaningful. Is it something that we can, is it about individual choice? Is it about influencing larger choices that are, to be made about where the community is sourcing energy? And somebody, where pipelines are being gone, what's going on at the local compressor station, will that be built? What's going on with the emissions that are going into the air? And there's a lot of conversations about what people can do there. And there's a fine line between, people that are getting together to even do activism, and historically we're able to use our meetings room to be able to hold meetings and gather. And it's weird to figure out how do we do this in this new era.
So, Clayton, I understand the point. I think they're really good points, and I love the idea of kind of supporting people who are curious to find the resources they need to learn and engage. And I'm delighted to hear that you're doing that. And I guess I also think that libraries now find themselves in this position of being guardians of our culture of democracy, and being promoters of a kind of civic engagement that we need in this country. And you started by talking about the training of librarians and the way in which librarians of today in the United States find themselves overwhelmed by the number of challenges that come in, that walk in through the door. And it is true, we have cut apart our safety net so dramatically in so many ways that people fall through and land in the library because the library has stayed open. And it's created really impossible burdens for librarians, who are not trained to give Narcan and to be babysitters when working parents leave their 3-year-olds there for the day, or when they have to manage a conflict between two people who are suffering with mental illnesses and who can't get treatment. I mean, there's so many therapy companions to older people who live alone and can't get service they need. I mean, there's so many things that librarians do in the course of the day. So some just, at the core of what the job description is, like helping young people learn how to do research because their schools don't have the schools don't have libraries anymore. So that the whole school class comes to work with the librarian on research. And
And at what point is the library, I do have a concern for that creep, because, if we come in and start taking over the education, does that let the school system off the hook? So I had actually argued that what we have to do is advocate for those, I don't want to be competing for dollars with the social workers that are doing the needle distribution in the van outside. They're doing important work, and I don't want my librarians distributing needles.
That's right. And we need to be, making the point that we can't expect libraries to handle all these things. We can't expect librarians to handle all these things. But we sometimes find ourselves in situations where, we have the library and we need the library community to stand for something more than it ordinarily does. So, I wrote this op-ed in the New York Times recently that Craig referred to, calling for communities to use libraries as polling places, calling for libraries to install ballot boxes, even if they do it outside, where people can drop off their ballots, because let's face it, we have a government that's attacking the democratic process, and that's doing everything possible to suppress the vote. And, we have libraries in every community that are capable of stepping up and supporting that effort. And it seems to me like we are going to need libraries and library workers to promote democratic practices and democratic values and democratic processes that are otherwise going to be in jeopardy in the next few weeks and months. And I don't feel like I don't feel reluctant to call upon you and your colleagues for support in this moment. And I think that's all important. I also think that, back to the role of libraries and looking a little bit at some of the questions that have been coming in, there are a bunch of issues that communities are dealing with now without great resources or great information, including, for our theme tonight, climate change. There's so much misinformation about climate change and, what it means and how it's affecting us. I think it's a real service for the library to hold events, public forums, in which, reputable sources and people with, genuine knowledge and expertise can speak to the community and speak with the community. People in the community can have their questions answered, not by an ideologue, but by someone who really understands and knows. And so, libraries have held forums like this for a long time. And it seems to me like the library can be a place where, to Fred's question, conservatives and liberals who live together but don't talk very much in upstate New York areas can have a conversation about how climate change affects their jobs, the security of their homes, the infrastructure of the place where they live. I think that's really important. I think to Michelle's question about resilience and infrastructure during the pandemic, libraries can't ask everyone to come inside the community room for an in-person meeting right now, but libraries can broker conversations like the one we're having right now. And it's amazing to see the set of things that libraries have been able to do digitally, remotely, in the parking lot, in front of the library building, drop-offs and information sessions and all kinds of, engagements that libraries are sponsoring, because nobody else in the community has their capacity or their reach or the level of local trust. And so it just seems to me that because libraries have a legitimacy and a standing that very few American institutions have, they can serve civic roles on difficult issues. And that doesn't mean being partisan. It doesn't mean encouraging people to vote one way or another, but it does mean trying to get the best possible information and to help people get their questions answered, kind of regardless of where they're coming from.
Yeah, you touched on a point I just wanted to expand upon, which, as we've been thinking, Erica, about the role of social infrastructure, with climate change specifically, we've been thinking, again, about cooling shelters during heat waves, and again, opening, having, whether it's libraries or houses of worship or civic centers, open their doors, as people are evacuating from wildfires and hurricanes. And again, like that immediate response opportunity is for us as been much more challenged to think about how we invite these institutions to be responsive to the many threats that we have. And we actually have done some work as CREW as part of a broader effort in Massachusetts to actually to help people get air conditioning in their homes, and to think about how do we expand like green spaces in communities to deal with the heat wave in the context of the pandemic. But I'd be curious if you wanted to just reflect more deeply on that question of in this era when so much is about coming together in person, both in terms of building the social resilience over the long haul, as well as that immediate response to these disasters when people need gathering points and need resources. How do we do that thoughtfully and responsibly in this COVID era? And I appreciate that may be a tough question to answer, but we welcome any more thoughts you have on that.
I mean, I think it's very hard for an organization to sponsor in-person gatherings right now because there's still risks and there's still liability issues, and you don't want to encourage you don't want to hold a rally in an arena with a bunch of people screaming, because that would be homicidal and stupid and dangerous and reckless. So if you want to be responsible about it, do things remotely and tell people that it's a poor substitute for face-to-face interaction, but it's what we have right now. I think it's important for people to know that you can, be out in the world and talk to other, people in your community. It's better to be outside. It's better, you should wear a mask. You should stay 6 feet apart. If you're sick, don't go. This is a time for us to recognize our linked fate, our mutual obligations to each other, and to know that it's going to be hard. We're going to miss, a lot of the good things that come from being together in person, in the analog world. The intimacy, that companionship. It's just not here, and it's not going to be viable. I know that people are going to rallies right now, and I know that people are going to bike rallies and boat rallies and political rallies and not wearing masks and saying the thing isn't happening. But the pandemic is real, and 200,000 Americans at least have died, and millions of Americans have gotten sick, at least 6. And we are an embarrassment, in the world, because there's no other country that's failed so miserably to manage this, especially with the resources, the scientific expertise, the wealth, the capacity that we have. This didn't need to happen. And so my view about that is if you're a community leader, if you're a library, if you're any institution, you should be promoting connection, but probably not physical connection at the moment.
I would add to that, Eric, that, I think it's spot on, and I agree with, I think, where you're at, but we also have to be kind to ourselves and to each other. This is a time when things are so raw and we're processing. We've been going, I remember saying this to our staff, and I think it just bears repeating to all of us that, it's a grieving process. This is a really, really hard experience for everybody, and we all deal with it in our own ways. And with the kind of loss and disconnection that's happening, we all, I think, respond to it, and can each have different responses depending upon the hour. So finding space for that kindness, I think, is super important. And then finding ways, something that you said in your book that I really appreciated was that, I think this was in your book, and correct me if I read this somewhere else, Eric, but it was that a lot of people claim that the rise of internet culture and dependency is responsible for the polarization in our communities and pulling people apart. But then, and I believe what you said was that actually some studies of communities that are the most polarized are some of the least connected to the internet. It's people that are stuck listening to one media channel or a different one that is just kind of this echo chamber. But I do believe that there's some opportunities through the social media. It's not, you talk about in your conclusion about Zuckerberg and the wonders of Facebook and how that is, a false promise. There's definitely some marketing and some engineering to keep us glued on potential ads to display to us. But the fact that I can meet with librarians from Western Massachusetts and neither of us have to drive for 3 hours and then we can be with our families immediately after has enriched some of my conversations and the frequency that I'm communicating with people, and has reduced some distances. And I take some comfort in that, at least.
Yeah, I did write that, and I think you're right.
Something that I kind of wanted you to address. I certainly want us to keep an eye on the Q&A, and if there's other questions here, I don't want to monopolize our time. Are there some questions here that you'd like to address? Because I have something else, but I want to leave. I see Kurt had something.
I mean, there's a couple questions. Michelle asked about the role of faith-based organizations, and I think they play a really crucial role in the United States. There's a whole section in my book about faith-based organizations and climate change, as a matter of fact. The chapter about climate change and policies for the people starts with a whole story about a religious organization in Houston, Texas that helped a lot of people in a flooded community get through the storm and has helped to rebuild afterwards. Americans are quite religious by comparative standards, and I think there's like more churches in the United States than McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King's, Pizza Huts, Arby's, Dunkin' Donuts combined.
Times 3, I think, right?
They're all over the place. And so they're very real centers of gathering, and they're genuine social infrastructure. I mean, they can often be exclusive, which is a problem with religious organizations. Not all are. The one I wrote about in Houston was very inclusive and did a lot to, do outreach to, people who are not part of their inside community. But some can be exclusive. Some are very ideological. And so they're not, in my sense, the ideal kinds of gathering places. But again, it's reckless to encourage people to come indoors to worship or to congregate at a moment like this. And there are religious organizations of all varieties that have been doing that in inappropriate ways across this country, which I'm frustrated by. That said, I think religious organizations can do a lot of stuff to support people and help people support one another. So that it's a real thing.
I was in a Rosh Hashanah service on Saturday that usually, we'd have 500 of us together in a big hall. And we were, we're all doing it by Zoom, and it's weird, but we're also working on a mutual aid group. And there definitely are, some, lots of different faith-based ways that people have found ways to connect and support people. Yeah.
No, that's right. Jennifer, Fred makes the point that there are some rural libraries in small towns that don't have an MLS qualified librarian, but a kind of political person who does their thing through the library. And I understand that's a reality, and that I find that frustrating too. I wish every municipality had a trained librarian to do their work. So I don't know what to say about that or do about that, but it's a fact on the ground. Kurt asked if we've been talking to foundations about this. To some extent, the pitch is to try to find philanthropic support to help libraries that are already in our community build up their physical infrastructure so that they can be more resilient places. They should all have generators so that they're a place that people can go in a crisis. They should have flexible space so that they can be used to provide meals or provide shelter for people who need them. They should certainly have the, updated bathrooms and HVAC systems so that they're safe during a heat wave or a blizzard, and that, the people can use the facilities when they need to. That I think all that can be done in the name of resilience. Kurt, if you've got good friends at Hewlett and Rockefeller, please let them know. We're happy to talk to them. Juliet Shore asks, to what extent and how do I feel that social infrastructure has been included in the Green New Deal? Most of the attention has been on jobs and energy transition. I think that's right. I think, the Green New Deal, there is no one Green New Deal right now. It's somewhat inchoate, and there's a lot of plans out there and proposals. So I see it occasionally, but I don't think it's been featured as prominently as it should be. I think depending on how the winds blow in November, if there's a possibility for doing legislation at the national level or at the state level to build out infrastructure, I really want there to be a social infrastructure component to that. And, I think the Green New Deal is on the ballot this year. There's a real possibility that this could be a thing that we are working on. And, I think mitigation is paramount. I mean, the most important thing for us to do is to decarbonize. And I would hate to build social infrastructure with money that could otherwise be going to mitigation projects. And obviously we need employment projects. But, the point I make in Palaces for the People is if you're going to build hard infrastructure of any kind, it can always be better or worse as a social infrastructure. And if you are thinking about social infrastructure and the possibilities for building gathering places as you develop a flood protection system, for instance, there are all kinds of things that you can do in an infrastructure project that we might not conventionally do. And Juliet, if that's an invitation to work with you on your Green New Deal projects, I happily accept. I think we need to build social infrastructure, and the reason I use that concept and introduced it in the book is that we need to have that idea in the conversation. It's not, when we talk about infrastructure, we still have a really limited notion of what infrastructure is. And the last question, and I'm gonna have to collapse into a ball with all these good questions, is from Jennifer, who says, we're trying to pivot to do best by the public and staff for health and safety. How do we advocate for funding when we're not providing social infrastructure in typical ways? Well, I don't know. I mean, my view is that libraries have been providing in all kinds of extraordinary ways during the pandemic. One of the remarkable things about libraries is the extent to which they have managed to evolve and stay contemporary and meet the needs of their constituents, integrate new technology. This is true for the last several decades, and they've really stepped up to provide essential services during the pandemic. Whether it's Wi-Fi access or expanded digital book and periodical access, or classes for children, reading groups, check-ins. You probably know that in Melbourne, Australia right now, where they've been on lockdown for several weeks, the librarians are calling every older person in the region, especially those who live alone, for check-ins to make sure that people are doing all right, and just to be a voice on the phone. I mean, it feels to me like librarians have proved their value, and libraries have done far more than anyone could have expected to help us get through this horrible catastrophe. And one of the things that libraries struggle with is promoting themselves and telling their story well and advocating for themselves. And unfortunately, I think that's true of a lot of wonderful social organizations. They do their thing, and they do it nobly and righteously, and don't necessarily know how to tell the story in a way that makes people want to contribute and give them the resources they need. And so I think, again, I keep talking about this reckoning, and I sure hope it's coming, but we have asked libraries to do so much for so long, and asked librarians to work in so many capacities. It would be an extraordinary thing if we gave them their due as a way of getting through this crisis we're in.
Eric, I want to also just add a couple other words for Jennifer. Madeline put a great link for librarians who are joining us to encourage them to join the Sustainability Roundtable and network with other librarians. I think as we talk about building, and justifying our work in social ways, it's just as important for librarians to be part of that social infrastructure in however we do it, whether it's with each other. It's also through kind of outreach to other organizations in our communities. We really need local answers that are looking at the local expression of these global problems, and there's a lot of people in our communities that are doing that, and I could talk for a while about different people I'm talking to in Quincy that are doing that, but I think the real core is we prove our worth by being at the table and just kind of being those present active members of our community, and healthy libraries are engaged and already doing that, and there's opportunities when the world's upside down for so many parts of our community to just engage those conversations and provide resources. A quote that I wanted to share and may be helpful is something that has been attributed to Thomas Jefferson, which is all about how information is the currency of democracy. If we want a democracy to work, we have to make sure that we're providing that information, and we're perfectly poised to do that. So, Eric, thank you so much for your thoughts tonight. I know there's been some other things shared. Fred gave us some more pieces in the question session here, which I'm not reading as quick. Maybe you've had a chance to look it over, but there's been a lot of great energy here. There's a lot of great work. You've done some really wonderful writing here and some and give us some great food for thought and some great support for libraries. I certainly have appreciated the the encouragement and support that you've brought to us tonight. So I personally want to thank you. And Craig, I don't know I think you may have a couple things you'd like to say too.
Yeah, just want to bring us to a close, but yeah, definitely want to echo Clayton's thanks for Eric. Again, I think your thought leadership on all of this, again, has been really instrumental for CREW as we've been approaching our work and think about how we build the social resilience of our communities. And yeah, again, thank you everyone for attending. As Izzy noted, please do check out the other events we have later this week. And again, if your institution would like to learn more about becoming a CREW Climate Resilience Hub, we would love to work with you on that, or to again support you in creating a CREW team in your neighborhood to help advance climate resilience. But yeah, Eric, I don't know if you want to have a closing thought, but again, we're just so delighted to have you with us tonight.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to be with all of you. And, we have a lot of work to do in the next few weeks. And so preserve your energy, eat a good breakfast, get some sleep, and go spend the days and nights fighting, because this is it right now. This is the moment. Take care, everybody. Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you all.